He laughed when I quit. Right there in front of the entire floor. I remember the sound of it clearly, that smug little exhale through his nose, like my absence was a joke, like my presence had never mattered. "You'll be crawling back once reality hits," he said. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already decided that I had wasted enough of my life building someone else's dream while being treated like a replaceable part. He didn't know what I had planned. He didn't know what was already set in motion. He just leaned back in his leather chair, smiled that crooked half-smile of his, and dismissed me like I was nothing. But that was the last day I ever let someone make me feel small. The last day I ever gave my talent away for free. I had worked at Valencia Systems for nearly 8 years. I was the strategist behind what they bragged about to their investors. I was the one who turned chaotic ideas into working models, the one who took their half-baked innovation goals and turned them into real projects and real revenue. You would think a CEO would value someone like that, mentor them, give them room to grow. Not this one. He liked control too much. He liked credit too much. And most of all, he liked the idea that everyone under him was afraid to leave. So every time someone tried to shine, he dimmed their light. Every time someone showed potential, he took their work and slapped his name on it. I was no exception. I just happened to last longer than most. The final straw was the annual review. I didn't ask for a raise. I didn't even ask for a promotion. All I asked for was acknowledgement of my contribution to the company's largest client acquisition. He stared across the table at me, clicked his pen, and said the words that ended everything: "We all contribute, but not everyone is built to lead." Then he stood up, shook my hand, and dismissed me from the room like I was done. He expected me to accept it. To swallow it. To stay quiet. Instead, I typed my resignation that night. No notice. No emotional explanation. Just 6 words, effective immediately. "Thank you for the opportunity." What he didn't know was that, for the past 6 months, I had been consulting privately. Quietly. Carefully. Legally. There was nothing in my contract restricting it. I knew how he treated people. I knew this day would come eventually. One of those clients happened to be a startup that had fire, vision, and hunger, everything Valencia Systems had lost. They were small when I met them. Scattered. Rough around the edges. But their idea was better than anything Valencia had touched in years. What they needed was guidance. Structure. A strategist who knew how the industry worked. Someone who had lived in the machine long enough to know how to beat it from the outside. For the next 3 months, I built with them. Not as an employee. As a partner. Then one day, we got the call. Tech World Expo. Main stage keynote. The industry event. Valencia Systems was presenting too. That was their pride event. Their spotlight. And the CEO, he always made sure he was front and center for it. Always basked in the applause. Always played the visionary. He had no idea I was coming. The morning of the expo felt electric. I remember seeing their booth first. Same banners. Same forced smiles. Same tired pitch. And there he was. Arrogant. Comfortable. Confident. Like the world was already his. He didn't see me. Not yet. That came later. When my team was announced on stage, the crowd was expecting something small, something forgettable. The room quieted when they saw me step up to the mic. And that's when I saw him. Standing near the front. His face went still. Eyes wide. The smirk slipped off like melting wax. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't say his name. I didn't have to. I presented our product, our strategy, our partnerships, our launch roadmap. The crowd didn't just clap, they roared. Investors swarmed us before we even left the stage. And him? He just stood there, silent, watching everything he underestimated walk right past him. By the end of that quarter, our startup had secured funding that tripled Valencia Systems' valuation. 2 of their biggest clients signed with us, and 3 of their best engineers followed. Not because I poached them. I didn't need to. People follow respect, not power. I never once mentioned him publicly. I never bragged. I never fought. I just built. And he had to live with knowing that the man he laughed at, the man he dismissed like nothing, had gone farther than he ever could. Revenge didn't come from proving him wrong. It came from proving myself right. People like him always expect the world to stay exactly as they left it. They expect everyone they stepped on to remain under their heel, frozen in place, waiting for validation that will never come. But the industry was changing. Conversations shifted. New voices were rising. And mine was one of them. I didn't seek attention, but attention knew where to find me now. I was invited to panels, interviews, think tanks. People wanted to understand how we moved so fast, how we broke into a market that had been locked down for decades. They were surprised when I answered honestly. We listened. We respected. We built with intention. There was no secret formula. Just dignity and hard work, something Valencia Systems had forgotten. I began seeing my former coworkers at conferences and professional events. Some avoided me, embarrassed by how they treated me back then. Others approached quietly, telling stories of how the CEO was pacing the halls now, more desperate, more controlling. The board was asking questions he didn't have answers to. Investors were pushing for growth he couldn't replicate. His confidence had cracked. And once someone like him cracks, the fall is fast and loud. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't need to. I remembered exactly who I used to be when I worked there, tired, overlooked, trying to prove myself to someone who never had the capacity to appreciate value in the first place. I couldn't hate him. I had outgrown him. Then one morning, I received a message from someone I hadn't expected, his assistant, the one who always looked exhausted, the one who silently fixed his mistakes, the one who was invisible in a room full of shouting voices. She asked if we were hiring. Not just for herself, but for a few others who couldn't take the environment anymore. She didn't beg. She didn't flatter. She simply said, "We want to do work we can be proud of again." I hired all of them. Not because I needed staff, we were doing fine. But because I knew what it felt like to lose yourself in a place that refuses to see you. Months later, I saw him again. Not on a stage. Not in a boardroom. He was sitting alone at a small trade booth at a minor industry fair, the kind of event he used to mock for being irrelevant. He looked smaller. Not physically. Just diminished. The kind of shrinking that happens when a person's power leaves before they do. He saw me. And there was no anger in his face. No arrogance. Just recognition, the quiet, heavy kind that weighs in the chest. He nodded. I nodded back. No words. No victory lap. No speech. Because the truth is, the revenge had already happened a long time ago. It happened the moment I stopped trying to earn his approval. It happened when I chose to build something of my own. It happened when I walked away. The real win wasn't standing on stage. It wasn't the funding. It wasn't the applause. The real win was this: I became someone I could be proud of. And he became a reminder of who I will never be again. Life settled into something calm after that. Not easy, not effortless, but calm in the way a person feels when they are finally moving in the direction they were always meant to go. I woke up each morning not to stress or obligation, but to purpose. I worked with people who challenged me, who questioned me, who improved the work rather than settling for good enough. Our office didn't look like success to outsiders. No glass walls. No marble lobby. Just a converted warehouse with big windows, scribbled whiteboards, late-night coffee cups, and the sound of ideas being built in real time. And yet, it felt more like home than any corporate tower ever had. I would watch my team sometimes, arguing, laughing, focused, frustrated, inspired, and I realized something I had never admitted. All I ever wanted was to be part of something real. Not something impressive, not something prestigious. Just something true. I heard through the industry that Valencia Systems was restructuring. Then downsizing. Then rebranding. Each headline was smaller than the last, quieter than the last, fading instead of falling. He stayed on as CEO for a while, clinging to the title like a lifeline. But a title means nothing when there's no belief behind it. Eventually, the board quietly removed him. No scandal. No press release. Just a footnote in a quarterly filing. They replaced him with someone younger, someone more open, someone who understood collaboration instead of control. The company still exists, technically. But the soul of it, the part that once dreamed, was gone long before I left. One rainy evening, years later, I saw him again. Not in business. Just life. He was sitting on a park bench, watching the streetlights shimmer across puddles. He looked tired, but calmer than I remembered. Not defeated, just human. I walked past him, and for a moment, we made eye contact. No bitterness. No tension. Just two people who had once shared a chapter of life that shaped them in different ways. He didn't speak. I didn't either. We didn't need to. Some stories don't end with apologies or confrontations. Some endings are just acknowledgments, a quiet understanding that both of us had to break to become who we were meant to be. I kept walking, hands in my coat pockets, listening to the sound of the rain. And I felt something I never expected to feel. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just peace. Because I finally understood, the real revenge was never the success, the applause, the stage, or the funding. The real revenge was that I learned how to respect myself again. I stopped fighting to be seen. And I started living in a world where I already was. As I walked home through the rain, I thought about how strange life can be. How the places we think will define us are often just stepping stones. How the people who try to limit us end up teaching us how far we're capable of going. I used to believe that my value came from how useful I was to someone else, how much profit I generated, how many problems I could solve, how quietly I could endure disrespect. I don't blame the younger version of me for believing that. He was trying to survive in a world that rewarded silence more than integrity. But surviving is not the same thing as living, and I didn't truly understand that until I finally walked away. Years passed like that, steady, fulfilling, honest. Our company grew slowly, but intentionally. We didn't chase trends or headlines. We didn't burn out chasing impossible timelines. We built systems meant to last, and we taught others how to do the same. I spent less time in boardrooms and more time mentoring. I saw young developers who reminded me of younger me, brilliant, soft-spoken, underestimated, learning how to trust their own voice. They didn't need to fight for visibility. They already had it. I made sure of that. One evening, after finishing a meeting, one of our newest hires stopped me. He was nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Eventually, he said, "I just wanted to thank you for making a place where people like us don't disappear." His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't know his full story. I didn't need to. I just nodded, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "You were never meant to disappear. You just needed space to exist." He smiled, and in that moment, I realized something quietly profound: the cycle had broken. No one here would lose themselves the way I once did. One day, I received an invitation to speak at a leadership symposium. The introduction they wrote for me was long, filled with accomplishments and awards, but the line that stayed with me was short: known for building organizations where people feel seen. Not strategic innovator. Not industry disruptor. Not visionary. Just someone who creates space for people to be themselves. That, more than any title, felt like success. Standing backstage before my talk, I thought about him again. The CEO who had once smirked at my resignation. Not with anger. Not with nostalgia. Just with understanding. He and I had both shaped each other's paths, just not in the way he intended. He taught me who I refused to become. And I taught myself who I wanted to be. I stepped onto the stage, lights warm on my face, room full of people listening not because they wanted to be impressed, but because they wanted to learn. I began speaking, not with grandeur or rehearsed lines, but with quiet honesty. The most important career decision you will ever make is this: choose to work where your presence matters. The audience leaned in. And I knew, in that moment, that I had finally become the person I needed when I was younger. That was the real ending. Not revenge. Not spectacle. Just a man who found his voice. And used it to help others find theirs too. The applause that night wasn't for revenge, it was for recognition that had taken too long to arrive. When the lights dimmed and the cameras shifted toward me, I didn't see the crowd, I saw the years that led to that moment. The late nights, the forgotten weekends, the quiet sacrifices that no one noticed because they were expected. I saw myself at that desk, loyal, careful, overlooked, while someone else was praised for simply existing in proximity to power. That memory didn't hurt anymore. It just felt distant, like something that used to belong to another version of me. The CEO's face, pale and rigid under the stage lighting, didn't fill me with satisfaction. It filled me with closure. Because that's when I realized the real victory wasn't his humiliation. It was my freedom. After that night, everything moved faster. My name began appearing in articles, invitations arrived in waves, and people who once avoided eye contact suddenly wanted to reconnect. I handled it quietly. Fame wasn't the goal, integrity was. The product I had built, the same one they dismissed as non-viable, was now setting new industry standards. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't need to point it out. Reality was doing that for me. The company that had discarded me was struggling to adapt, its once predictable structure now bending under the weight of bad decisions. They had talent, but not leadership. They had data, but not direction. And that was something no amount of money could replace. A few months later, I received an email. Not from the CEO, but from the board. They wanted a conversation. The same word they'd used when they told me I wasn't aligned with the company's vision. I stared at the message for a while before replying. I agreed to meet, but on one condition: it would be public. Recorded. Transparent. They didn't like that. They offered to make it private, more professional. I declined. Some things need witnesses. When the day arrived, I walked into the same glass conference room where I had once sat in silence while they made decisions over my work. This time, I was the one who set the agenda. The CEO tried to speak first, but his confidence faltered. He looked older, not just tired, but defeated in a way that happens when power no longer hides your insecurities. He started with small talk, a hollow attempt to sound casual. I listened. I let him speak. And when he finally ran out of practiced sentences, I told him the truth. You never fired me because I was the problem. You fired me because I reminded you of what you weren't. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. Because in that room, for the first time, every person saw what arrogance costs when it collides with integrity. I didn't stay long after that. I didn't need to. The meeting wasn't about revenge, it was about balance. I left quietly, the same way I had years ago, but this time, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward everything I had built for myself. Outside, the evening air felt lighter. Cities always sound different when you finally stop carrying their noise inside you. I stood there for a moment, watching the lights flicker on across the skyline, and smiled, not out of triumph, but out of peace. Because in the end, it wasn't about making him regret losing me. It was about proving to myself that I was never lost to begin with. Months passed after that final meeting, but the ripples it caused never really stopped. My quiet exit from their boardroom became an unspoken story within the corporate world, a whispered lesson about underestimating the people who build the foundations you stand on. Other executives called it the calmest rebellion they'd ever seen. I didn't deny it. I'd spent years giving that company my innovation, my loyalty, and my silence. So when I walked away, I took with me the one thing they couldn't quantify: credibility. And in this world, credibility moves faster than capital. Soon, I was invited to keynote a global conference, one focused on ethical leadership and innovation. I almost declined, the irony was too poetic. But something inside me knew this wasn't about ego. It was about legacy. The night of the event, the auditorium shimmered under soft blue lights, rows of familiar faces blending into the audience. As I stepped onto the stage, I spotted him, the CEO, sitting near the back. No entourage this time. No smug smile. Just a man surrounded by everything he once thought he controlled, realizing it was never truly his. I didn't acknowledge him directly, but I didn't need to. Every word I spoke that night was the answer to every time he dismissed me. I talked about what leadership actually means, how real leaders don't build walls of hierarchy, they build bridges of trust. How innovation isn't born from money, but from the freedom to fail without fear. The audience was silent, listening not like spectators, but like participants who'd been there too, betrayed, replaced, reborn. When the standing ovation came, it wasn't explosive. It was emotional. Raw. Like they weren't clapping for me, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked yet refused to stay silent. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, I saw him approaching slowly. For a second, I expected another attempt at fake courtesy or negotiation. But when he finally stood in front of me, his voice cracked. "You were right," he said. "We didn't lose an employee. We lost our future." I nodded politely. "No," I replied softly. "You didn't lose your future. You gave it away." Then I turned, leaving him under the cold glow of the stage lights, the same lights that once made him feel untouchable, now exposing everything he'd broken. That was the last time I saw him. In the months that followed, their company began merging with another to stay afloat. My new venture flourished, an organization that valued transparency, creativity, and ethics. We didn't build the next billion-dollar empire. We built something rarer: trust. And that was enough. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about the old office. The coffee machine that always jammed. The whiteboards filled with ideas that never got credit. The laughter between the people who made everything run while the executives took the applause. Those memories used to sting. Now, they fuel me. They remind me that revenge doesn't always roar, it often whispers. It's not about destroying what hurt you. It's about outgrowing it so completely that it can no longer reach you. And as I stand in my own office now, overlooking a skyline that no longer feels like someone else's kingdom, I realize something simple yet profound. Sometimes the best revenge isn't making them regret losing you. It's becoming someone they can never replace. As the years went on, the story of that stage night turned into something of a legend in the industry. People began to repeat it not as gossip, but as a lesson, a parable about how arrogance can collapse even the strongest empire when it's built on dismissal. I never publicly confirmed or denied the story. I didn't need to. The truth has a way of echoing without permission. My focus was on what came next, nurturing a culture where innovation wasn't strangled by ego, where credit flowed to the people who earned it, and where ideas could breathe without fear of being stolen. I poured my energy into that mission the same way I once poured it into a company that never saw my worth. But this time, the difference was clear. I wasn't building for someone else's dream. I was building from my own scars. Over time, my new company became a beacon for disillusioned engineers, designers, and thinkers who'd been burned by the same kind of corporate vanity I had escaped. We didn't recruit people with perfect resumes. We recruited people with untold stories. The ones who had been silenced, overshadowed, or underestimated. Every hire was another line in a redemption story that wasn't just mine anymore, it was ours. And as I walked through our open concept office, hearing laughter replace tension, creativity replace compliance, I knew I had created something real. Something they couldn't copy no matter how many strategy meetings they held. Then, one evening, I got an invitation that made me pause. It was from a prestigious innovation summit, the same one the old CEO used to attend every year, often flaunting the awards I had secretly helped him win. This time, the invitation was addressed to me, as the keynote speaker. I almost laughed. The symmetry of it all was too poetic. When I arrived, I saw familiar faces from the old days, the board members, the executives, even some of the same investors who once saw me as replaceable. Their smiles were polite, but behind them I could see the realization settling in. The man they had discarded was now setting the standard they were trying to reach. When I took the stage that night, I didn't talk about revenge. I talked about evolution. About how every betrayal teaches you something vital about your own strength. About how the collapse of one chapter often becomes the foundation of the next. The audience listened, some leaning forward, some with eyes that glistened in quiet recognition. I ended my speech with a simple truth. They called it quitting when I walked away. But I know now, it was actually beginning. When I stepped off the stage, the applause was thunderous, but I didn't look for the CEO this time. He wasn't there. Later, I heard he had retired quietly, the company broken into fragments, swallowed by competitors who did what he never could, adapt. I didn't celebrate that. I just nodded and moved on. Because the greatest revenge stories aren't about their fall, they're about your rise. And mine was still just getting started. Sometimes, in moments of quiet reflection, I think about that final image, his smirk the day I quit, frozen in my memory like an unfinished sentence. Now, every success, every stage, every patent, and every applause feels like the period that completes it. The full stop that ends the chapter he thought he'd written for me. And with that, I smile, not with anger, not with pride, but with peace. Because the truth is simple, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's legacy. Years later, that legacy grew beyond anything I had imagined. My company, once a small operation born out of defiance and a need to prove myself, became a movement, a standard bearer for how integrity and innovation could coexist in a world that had forgotten both. We were no longer the underdogs, we were the blueprint. Our products began reshaping industries that had long grown stagnant, our ethics reshaping the way leaders were expected to lead. And through it all, I stayed grounded, because I remembered exactly where I came from, a cubicle filled with dreams that others called naive. The world changed around us. Competitors who once mocked our approach started copying it. Articles called us the revenge of the innovators, though I always felt uneasy with that term. It wasn't revenge anymore, not in the vengeful sense. It was restoration. A rebalancing of what had gone wrong. We didn't rise by tearing anyone down, we rose because we refused to play by their small rules. I built a team of people who had all known what it meant to be underestimated, and that shared history became our strength. We didn't need validation anymore. The results spoke louder than any apology ever could. But one day, as I was preparing for another international summit, an unexpected letter arrived at my office. It was handwritten, something rare these days. The return address made my heart still for a moment. It was from the former CEO. I hadn't heard from him in years. Inside, the words were short and trembling. He was dying, and he wanted to meet, not to justify himself, but to apologize. He said he finally understood what leadership meant, though he'd realized it far too late. I sat with that letter for a long time. My younger self would have burned it without hesitation. But I wasn't that person anymore. A week later, I visited him. The hospital room was quiet, sterile, filled with the weight of time and regret. He looked small, not just older, but humbled by everything he'd lost. When he saw me, he tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "You were the best thing that ever happened to that company," he whispered. I was just too proud to see it. I didn't respond right away. There was nothing to say that could undo the past. So I just nodded. He smiled faintly and added, "You built something beautiful, something I never could." Then, with a sigh that sounded almost like relief, he closed his eyes. I left the hospital that night in silence, the city lights blurring through the car window like streaks of memory. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, or even triumph. I felt gratitude for every betrayal that had redirected my path, every loss that had become my teacher, every scar that had turned into a story worth telling. The man who once smirked when I quit had taught me one final lesson without even realizing it, that revenge loses its edge when you find peace. Now, when people ask me how it feels to have the world finally recognize my work, I tell them the truth. Success isn't the crowd's applause or the spotlight's glow. It's the quiet moment you realize you don't need either. It's knowing that every time someone calls your journey revenge, what they're really describing is redemption. And as I look out from my corner office, the skyline glittering like a promise I kept to myself, I whisper a silent thank you to the ghosts of the past. Because without them, I might never have learned that sometimes the best way to win is simply to outlast. And so, standing there in my office years later, overlooking the same city where it had all begun, I finally understood what the journey had truly been about. It was never about proving him wrong, it was about proving myself right. Every late night, every insult disguised as feedback, every silent moment of rage at being overlooked, they had all built the foundation for something greater than revenge. They had built clarity. I had spent so long trying to earn recognition from people who could never see beyond their own reflection, that I forgot the simple truth: validation means nothing when it comes from the wrong source. The company that once dismissed me was now just a fading name buried under acquisitions and scandals. Their logo, once plastered across skyscrapers, now appeared only in outdated case studies about corporate downfall. But my name, our name, had become synonymous with something they never valued: respect. We didn't just create technology, we created trust. And that, in the end, was worth more than any award, any paycheck, any apology. Sometimes, young engineers or entrepreneurs ask me how I stayed calm when everything fell apart, when I walked out with nothing but my principles and a bruised sense of self-worth. I tell them the truth: I didn't stay calm. I was angry. I was broken. But I kept going anyway. Because sometimes, the fire that nearly consumes you is the same one that forges your steel. What matters isn't how they treated you, it's what you became despite them. Now, As I look out the window and see the skyline shimmering in the evening haze, I think of that smirk he gave me when I quit, the smug certainty that he had won. And I smile, quietly, because that moment feels like a lifetime ago. He thought I was walking away in defeat. But I was walking toward destiny. The truth is, he never fired me. He freed me. And that's the irony of revenge stories like mine. They don't end with someone's downfall. They end with your rise. Because real revenge isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It's quiet, patient, and unstoppable. It's the moment when you realize the best way to destroy those who doubted you is to become everything they'll never be.